Question 1. Governance review demonstrates that the DVSA in the UK has identified inconsistencies in the assessment of the pulling up on the right side of the road, reversing for 15 meters, and rejoining the traffic maneuver during practical driving tests. To address this, what is the most effective strategy for ensuring standardized and fair assessment across all testing centers? Option A. Temporarily reduce the number of practical tests conducted at centers where inconsistencies have been noted until a vague recalibration is achieved. Option B. Implement regular examiner calibration sessions, enhance quality assurance through periodic observations, and establish a clear feedback loop for examiners, all grounded in DVSA official guidance for maneuver assessment. Option C. Primarily rely on processing and acting upon candidate complaints as the main method for identifying and rectifying assessment variations. Option D. Issue a general directive to all examiners to either increase or decrease their strictness in assessing the maneuver without specific training or revised guidance. The correct answer is B. Implement regular examiner calibration sessions, enhance quality assurance through periodic observations, and establish a clear feedback loop for examiners, all grounded in DVSA official guidance for maneuver assessment. Explanation. Governance review demonstrates that the DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, in the UK is facing challenges in ensuring consistent application of the practical driving test standards across all testing centers. A recent internal audit highlighted variations in how examiners assess certain maneuvers, particularly the pulling up on the right side of the road, reversing for 15 meters, and rejoining the traffic maneuver, leading to potential unfairness for candidates. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for standardized assessment with the practical realities of diverse road conditions and examiner discretion. Ensuring fairness and public confidence in the driving test system is paramount, and deviations from established standards can undermine this. The best approach involves a multifaceted strategy focused on reinforcing existing standards and providing targeted support. This includes conducting regular calibration sessions for examiners to ensure consistent interpretation and application of the maneuver assessment criteria as outlined in the DVSA official guidance. Furthermore, implementing a robust quality assurance process with periodic independent observations of test conduct, coupled with a clear feedback mechanism for examiners, is crucial. This approach directly addresses the audit findings by standardizing assessment, providing evidence-based support for examiners, and maintaining a high level of accountability, thereby upholding the integrity of the driving test in accordance with DVSA regulations and the principles of fair assessment. An incorrect approach would be to simply issue a blanket directive to all examiners to be stricter or more lenient, without providing specific guidance or training. This fails to address the root cause of the inconsistency, which is a lack of shared understanding or application of the existing standards. It risks creating further confusion and potentially penalizing candidates unfairly. Another incorrect approach would be to reduce the frequency of practical tests in centers identified with inconsistencies, citing a need for recalibration. While seemingly proactive, this approach punishes candidates for systemic issues within the examiner pool and does not directly resolve the assessment variations. It also fails to acknowledge the DVSA mandate to provide testing services efficiently. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to rely solely on candidate complaints to identify and address assessment inconsistencies. While complaints can be a useful indicator, they are reactive and may not capture all instances of non-standard assessment. This approach is insufficient for proactive governance and ensuring consistent quality across the board. Professionals should employ a systematic approach to address such governance challenges. This involves 1. Acknowledging and thoroughly investigating the findings of internal reviews. 2. Identifying the specific areas of divergence and their underlying causes. 3. Developing targeted interventions that are aligned with regulatory requirements and best practices for professional development. 4. Implementing robust monitoring and evaluation mechanisms to ensure the effectiveness of interventions and to drive continuous improvement. Question 2. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a driver testing candidate in Ontario, Canada, has demonstrated consistent difficulty with blind spot checks and maintaining appropriate speed on highway on-ramps throughout the practical examination. Despite these recurring issues, the candidate has otherwise navigated the test route without major infractions. Considering the Ministry of Transportation Ontario's guidelines for driver licensing, what is the most appropriate course of action for the examiner? Option A. Objectively document all observed deficiencies in blind spot checks and highway ramp speed control against the MTO's established performance criteria and make a pass/fail decision based on whether the candidate meets the minimum standards for safe driving. Option B. Provide the candidate with immediate, in-depth coaching on blind spot checks and highway ramp merging techniques during the remainder of the test to help them improve their performance. Option C. Fail the candidate solely based on the observed difficulties with blind spot checks and highway ramp speed, without considering any other aspects of their driving performance or the overall context of the test. Option D. Pass the candidate, acknowledging their struggles with blind spot checks and highway ramp speed, but reasoning that they have completed the majority of the test without significant errors and appear eager to learn. Correct answer is A. Objectively document all observed deficiencies in blind spot checks and highway ramp speed control against the MTO's established performance criteria and make a pass/fail decision based on whether the candidate meets the minimum standards for safe driving. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in the context of driver testing in Ontario, Canada. The challenge lies in balancing the need for a thorough and objective assessment of a candidate's driving ability with the potential for external pressures or personal biases to influence the evaluation. The examiner must adhere strictly to the Ministry of Transportation, MTO, Ontario's testing standards and guidelines to ensure fairness and public safety. The professional challenge is to maintain impartiality and uphold the integrity of the licensing process, even when faced with a candidate who appears to be struggling or when there's a perceived urgency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a systematic and objective evaluation of the candidate's performance against the established MTO testing criteria. This means meticulously observing and documenting all driving actions, including adherence to traffic laws, vehicle control, observation skills, and decision-making. If a candidate consistently demonstrates a lack of skill or understanding in critical areas, even after demonstrating some proficiency elsewhere, the examiner must record these deficiencies accurately. The decision to pass or fail is based solely on whether the candidate meets the minimum standards outlined in the MTO's driver examination program. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the MTO's mandate to ensure that only competent and safe drivers are licensed, thereby protecting public safety. It upholds the ethical obligation of the examiner to be impartial and to apply the standards consistently to all candidates. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to pass a candidate who has demonstrated significant and repeated errors in critical driving tasks, such as failing to check blind spots adequately or making unsafe lane changes, simply because they have completed the rest of the test without major incident. This fails to uphold the MTO's safety standards and compromises the integrity of the licensing process. It is ethically unsound as it puts other road users at risk. Another incorrect approach would be to fail a candidate prematurely based on a single, minor error that does not significantly impact safety, or to allow personal feelings of sympathy to override the objective assessment of their driving. This demonstrates a lack of adherence to the MTO's established evaluation criteria and introduces subjective bias, which is unprofessional and unfair. A further incorrect approach would be to provide excessive, unsolicited coaching or guidance during the test that goes beyond clarifying instructions. While the examiner's role is to assess, it is not to teach during the test itself. This blurs the line between assessment and instruction, potentially inflating the candidate's performance and failing to accurately reflect their independent driving ability. This undermines the purpose of the test and is not in line with MTO testing protocols. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective adherence to established standards. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the MTO's driver examination program standards and criteria. 2. Maintaining strict impartiality and avoiding personal biases or external pressures. 3. Systematically observing and documenting all aspects of the candidate's driving performance. 4. Making a pass/fail decision based solely on whether the candidate has met the defined performance standards without deviation. 5. recognizing that the primary responsibility is to public safety and the integrity of the licensing system. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that during a driving test in Coventry, a candidate momentarily glances away from the road while approaching a busy junction, but then quickly refocuses and proceeds safely without causing any obstruction or danger. Which approach best reflects the required professional conduct for the examiner? Option A. Treat the lapse as a serious driving fault due to the inherent risks associated with junctions. Option B. Record the momentary lapse in concentration as a minor driving fault, noting its potential impact on situational awareness. Option C. Focus only on whether the candidate's actions created an immediate danger to other road users. Option D. Disregard the lapse entirely as no immediate hazard or obstruction was caused. The correct answer is B. Record the momentary lapse in concentration as a minor driving fault, noting its potential impact on situational awareness. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the examiner to balance the need for thorough assessment of a candidate's driving ability with the paramount importance of road safety and adherence to the highway code. The examiner must make a judgment call on whether a minor, potentially unintentional, lapse in concentration poses an unacceptable risk, even if it doesn't directly lead to an immediate dangerous situation. The pressure to pass candidates while upholding safety standards creates a complex decision-making environment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting the observed behavior and its potential implications for road safety, even if it doesn't result in an immediate hazard. This approach aligns with the core principles of the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, DVSA in the UK, which mandates that examiners assess a candidate's ability to drive safely and competently, in accordance with the highway code. A momentary lapse in concentration, particularly at a junction, can be a precursor to more serious errors. Therefore, recording it as a driving fault, even a minor one, is crucial for a comprehensive and accurate assessment of the candidate's overall standard of driving and their potential risk to other road users. This ensures that the assessment reflects the reality of safe driving, which includes sustained attention and anticipation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to record the lapse in concentration, despite its potential to indicate a momentary loss of awareness, is an ethical and regulatory failure. It misrepresents the candidate's performance and undermines the integrity of the driving test, which is designed to ensure all licensed drivers meet a minimum standard of safety. This approach neglects the DVSA guidance on assessing potential risks. Treating the lapse as a serious fault without sufficient evidence of immediate danger or a clear breach of the highway code would be an overreach. While vigilance is key, the assessment must be proportionate to the observed behavior. This approach could lead to an unfair failure and does not reflect the nuanced grading system for driving faults, focusing solely on whether the candidate caused an immediate hazard, while important, is insufficient. The DVSA standards require examiners to assess the candidate's ability to anticipate and avoid potential hazards, not just react to them. A lapse in concentration, even without immediate consequence, indicates a potential weakness in this anticipatory skill. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the specific requirements of the Highway Code and DVSA guidelines for assessing driving faults. 2. Objectively observing and documenting candidate behavior. 3. Evaluating the observed behavior against the established criteria for minor, serious, and dangerous faults, considering both immediate impact and potential future risk. 4. Making a judgment that is fair, consistent, and upholds the standards of road safety. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate that during a driving test in Coventry, a driver is instructed by the examiner to pull over safely on the left. Considering the requirements of the Highway Code and the DVSA testing standards, which of the following actions best demonstrates professional competence and adherence to regulations? Option A. The driver immediately pulls over to the left at the nearest possible point, even if it means stopping near a junction or on a section of road with limited visibility. Option B. The driver questions the examiner extensively about the necessity of pulling over at that specific moment, delaying the maneuver. Option C. The driver acknowledges the instruction and proceeds to pull over on the left at the first available safe and legal location, ensuring no obstruction to other road users and complying with all relevant traffic signs and road markings. Option D. The driver ignores the instruction to pull over and continues driving, believing they are in a better position to assess the situation. The correct answer is C. The driver acknowledges the instruction and proceeds to pull over on the left at the first available safe and legal location, ensuring no obstruction to other road users and complying with all relevant traffic signs and road markings. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a driver to balance the immediate need to complete a driving test with the paramount importance of road safety and adherence to traffic laws. The examiner's instruction, while seemingly minor, could potentially lead to a breach of regulations if misinterpreted or executed without due care. The driver must exercise sound judgment to ensure compliance and safety, even under the pressure of a test. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves acknowledging the examiner's instruction while prioritizing safe and legal execution. This means understanding the instruction within the context of the highway code and ensuring that any maneuver, including pulling over, is performed in a manner that does not endanger other road users or contravene specific traffic regulations for stopping. The driver should confirm the instruction if there is any ambiguity, and then proceed with a safe and legal stop, demonstrating competence and adherence to rules. This aligns with the fundamental principles of safe driving and the requirements of the DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, testing standards, which emphasize hazard perception and rule compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately pulling over without considering the legality or safety of the chosen stopping location. This could lead to stopping in a prohibited area, such as a bus stop, a junction, or on a bend, which would be a direct contravention of the highway code and a failure to demonstrate safe driving judgment. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the examiner's instruction altogether. This would be a clear failure to follow instructions, a critical component of the driving test, and would likely result in an immediate fail. It also demonstrates a lack of responsiveness to the examiner's guidance, which is essential for effective communication and safety. A further incorrect approach is to question the examiner's instruction excessively or to argue about its validity. While seeking clarification is acceptable if an instruction is genuinely unclear, prolonged debate or resistance undermines the authority of the examiner and the purpose of the test, which is to assess the candidate's ability to drive safely and legally under instruction. This demonstrates poor temperament and an inability to work collaboratively under pressure. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Active listening and understanding instructions. 2. Assessing the instruction against known regulations, e.g., Highway Code. 3. Seeking clarification if ambiguity exists. 4. Executing the instruction in the safest and most legally compliant manner possible. 5. Maintaining composure and professionalism throughout the interaction. Question 5. Risk assessment procedures indicate that the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, DVSA, in Coventry has introduced updated practical driving test assessment criteria. As a driving instructor, what is the most appropriate initial step to ensure compliance and effective learner preparation? Option A. Thoroughly review the updated DVSA guidance, identify specific changes in assessment criteria, and adapt training materials and mock test procedures accordingly. Option B. Prioritize teaching the most complex new assessment criteria extensively, potentially at the expense of foundational driving skills, to ensure learners are overprepared for the changes. Option C. Continue teaching with the existing syllabus, making only minor adjustments as needed when candidates encounter new assessment points during lessons. Option D. Focus training on the new criteria that are easiest to teach and assess, while de-emphasizing more challenging aspects of the updated syllabus. The correct answer is A. Thoroughly review the updated DVSA guidance, identify specific changes in assessment criteria, and adapt training materials and mock test procedures accordingly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Coventry, UK, concerning the implementation of new assessment criteria for the practical driving test. The challenge lies in balancing the need to adhere strictly to the updated DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, guidelines with the practical realities of training diverse learners and ensuring fair and consistent assessment. The instructor must navigate potential conflicts between established teaching methods and the precise requirements of the new syllabus, while also managing learner expectations and anxieties. Careful judgment is required to interpret and apply the new rules effectively, without compromising the quality of instruction or the integrity of the test. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and systematic approach to understanding and integrating the new DVSA syllabus requirements. This includes thoroughly reviewing the updated guidance, identifying specific changes in assessment criteria, and adapting existing training materials and methodologies accordingly. The instructor should then conduct mock tests using the new criteria to gauge learner preparedness and identify areas needing further focus. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the regulatory obligation to follow DVSA standards, ensuring that all candidates are assessed according to the most current and official requirements. Ethically, it promotes fairness and transparency by preparing learners for the exact standards they will face on their test. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves continuing to teach using the previous syllabus without significant modification, assuming the changes are minor or can be addressed ad hoc during lessons. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to comply with the explicit regulatory mandate to adopt the new DVSA assessment criteria. It risks presenting candidates for a test under outdated standards, leading to potential failure and undermining the credibility of the instructor and the testing process. Another incorrect approach is to overemphasize the new criteria to the point of creating undue stress and anxiety for learners, potentially neglecting foundational driving skills that are still essential. This is ethically problematic as it prioritizes a narrow interpretation of the new syllabus over the holistic development of a safe and competent driver. It also fails to acknowledge that, while the assessment criteria may evolve, the fundamental principles of safe driving remain paramount. A further incorrect approach is to selectively apply the new criteria, focusing only on aspects that are easier to teach or assess, while downplaying more challenging elements. This is both a regulatory and ethical failure. It violates the principle of consistent and fair assessment mandated by the DVSA and is ethically unsound as it creates an uneven playing field for candidates, potentially disadvantaging those who might struggle with the aspects that are being overlooked. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance, ethical practice, and learner welfare. This involves a continuous learning cycle. First, understanding the updated regulations, DVSA syllabus. Second, assessing the impact of these changes on current practices. Third, adapting training and assessment methods. And finally, evaluating the effectiveness of these adaptations through feedback and performance monitoring. A commitment to ongoing professional development and open communication with learners about changes are crucial elements of this framework. Question 6. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a driving instructor in Coventry, UK, is preparing a candidate for their practical driving test. The candidate has expressed high confidence and a strong desire to take the test next week, having recently passed several mock tests with the instructor. However, during the last few training sessions, the candidate has shown a tendency to hesitate at junctions, occasionally misjudging the speed of oncoming traffic, and has demonstrated some difficulty with independent driving in complex urban environments. Considering the DVSA requirements for safe and independent driving, which approach best reflects professional responsibility and adherence to regulatory expectations? Option A. Advise the candidate that, while their confidence is positive, further training is required to address specific areas of concern regarding junction assessment and independent driving before they are ready for the practical test, and schedule additional sessions focusing on these skills. Option B. Recommend the candidate take the test immediately, focusing solely on ensuring they can perform the required maneuvers perfectly, as this is the primary focus of the DVSA practical test. Option C. Inform the candidate that their mock test results are sufficient and encourage them to take the test, but suggest they rely heavily on the examiner's instructions during the actual test to compensate for any independent driving challenges. Option D. Proceed with booking the practical driving test as requested by the candidate, given their high confidence and recent success in mock tests, assuming the actual test conditions will help them overcome any minor hesitations. The correct answer is A. Advise the candidate that while their confidence is positive, Further training is required to address specific areas of concern regarding junction assessment and independent driving before they are ready for the practical test, and schedule additional sessions focusing on these skills. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Coventry, UK, due to the inherent risks associated with novice drivers and the strict regulatory environment governing driver training. The challenge lies in balancing the need to prepare a candidate for the practical driving test with the paramount duty of ensuring public safety on the roads. The instructor must navigate the candidate's anxiety, potential overconfidence, and the specific requirements of the DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, syllabus, all while adhering to professional ethical standards and legal obligations. Careful judgment is required to assess the candidate's readiness for the test, not just their ability to perform individual maneuvers, but their overall safe driving behavior and decision-making under pressure. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of the candidate's overall driving competence and safety awareness, directly aligned with the DVSA Learning to Drive and the Highway Code. This approach prioritizes the candidate's ability to drive independently and safely in various traffic conditions, demonstrating a proactive understanding of potential hazards and appropriate responses. It involves a final, thorough review of all syllabus areas, focusing on areas where the candidate has shown consistent difficulty or where their judgment might be compromised by test anxiety. The instructor should engage in a detailed discussion about the candidate's self-assessment and provide constructive feedback, reinforcing safe driving principles rather than merely ticking off checklist items. This aligns with the DVSA objective of producing safe, responsible drivers, not just individuals who can pass a test. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely focusing on the candidate's performance in mock tests, assuming that a good score in simulated test conditions guarantees readiness. This fails to account for the psychological impact of the actual test environment, which can exacerbate anxiety and lead to errors not present in practice. It also risks overlooking underlying issues in hazard perception or independent driving that might not be fully captured in a structured mock test. Another unacceptable approach is to proceed with the test if the instructor has significant reservations about the candidate's ability to drive safely and independently, based on their performance in the lead-up to the test. This prioritizes the candidate's desire to take the test over the safety of the candidate, the examiner, and other road users. It contravenes the instructor's ethical duty of care and the DVSA mandate to ensure only competent drivers are licensed. A further flawed approach is to solely rely on the candidate's self-reported confidence and desire to take the test, without conducting a rigorous, objective assessment of their skills against the DVSA syllabus. While candidate confidence is a factor, it must be balanced with demonstrable competence. Over-reliance on self-assessment can lead to a candidate taking the test unprepared, increasing the likelihood of failure and potentially unsafe driving. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements, DVSA syllabus, Highway Code, and ethical obligations, duty of care, public safety. This framework involves continuous assessment of the candidate's progress, identifying strengths and weaknesses, and tailoring instruction accordingly. Before recommending a test, a comprehensive evaluation of the candidate's ability to drive safely and independently in diverse conditions is crucial. This includes assessing their hazard perception, decision-making, and adherence to the principles of safe driving, not just the mechanics of test maneuvers. Open communication with the candidate about their readiness, coupled with objective professional judgment, is essential. If there are doubts about safety or competence, the professional responsibility is to advise against taking the test, explaining the rationale clearly and constructively, and to continue training until the required standard is met. Question 7. System analysis indicates a driving instructor in Ontario, Canada, is preparing a student for their G2 road test. The student has demonstrated proficiency in all required maneuvers during practice sessions, but becomes visibly anxious and makes minor, correctable errors when the instructor mentions the upcoming test date. Considering the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's emphasis on safe driving practices, what is the most professionally responsible course of action for the instructor? Option A. Cancel the road test and recommend the student seek professional help for their anxiety before any further driving instruction. Option B. Advise the student that their anxiety is unacceptable and refuse to allow them to take the road test until they can demonstrate perfect composure. Option C. Proceed with the road test immediately, assuming the student's anxiety will subside once they are in the official testing environment. Option D. Conduct a final practice session focusing on stress management techniques and assess if the student can consistently apply safe driving principles despite their anxiety before proceeding with the road test. Correct answer is D. Conduct a final practice session focusing on stress management techniques and assess if the student can consistently apply safe driving principles despite their anxiety before proceeding with the road test. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Ontario, Canada, due to the strict regulatory framework governing driver training and the ethical obligation to ensure public safety. The challenge lies in balancing the student's desire to pass the road test with the instructor's responsibility to certify competence according to the Ministry of Transportation's MTO standards. Misjudging a student's readiness, especially when they exhibit signs of anxiety that could impair their driving, risks not only a failed test but, more critically, the potential for an unsafe driver on Ontario's roads. Professional judgment is paramount in assessing a student's true ability beyond mere memorization of maneuvers. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the student's overall driving ability, focusing on their consistent application of safe driving principles and their ability to manage anxiety-induced errors. This approach prioritizes the safety of the student and the public, aligning with the core mandate of the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's driver licensing program. A qualified instructor must be confident that the student can operate a vehicle safely and competently under various conditions, not just during a controlled test environment. This includes recognizing when anxiety is a significant impediment to safe driving and addressing it proactively. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the road test despite clear indicators of significant anxiety that are demonstrably impairing the student's ability to drive safely and follow instructions. This fails to uphold the instructor's duty of care and contravenes the MTO's objective of licensing safe drivers. It prioritizes the student's immediate desire to test over their actual readiness and the safety of others. Another incorrect approach is to prematurely terminate the lesson and refuse to proceed with the test solely based on a minor, isolated error, without considering the student's overall performance and potential for recovery. While safety is key, a single mistake, if not indicative of a systemic lack of skill or judgment, might not warrant immediate disqualification from testing, especially if the student demonstrates the ability to correct and learn. This approach lacks nuance and fails to provide a comprehensive evaluation. A third incorrect approach is to downplay the student's expressed anxiety and proceed with the test as if it were not a factor. This dismisses the student's subjective experience and the potential objective impact of anxiety on their performance. It demonstrates a lack of empathy and a failure to recognize that anxiety can significantly affect a driver's ability to process information and react appropriately, thereby compromising safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory objectives, MTO standards for safe driving. This involves continuous, objective assessment of the student's skills, not just during formal testing but throughout the training period. When faced with challenges like student anxiety, the professional must weigh the immediate situation against the overarching goal of public safety. This requires open communication with the student, honest assessment of their readiness, and the courage to postpone or recommend further practice when necessary, even if it means delaying the student's immediate goal. The decision should always be grounded in a commitment to licensing only competent and safe drivers. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a learner driver in Coventry, UK, is exhibiting clear signs of severe anxiety and distress, bordering on a panic attack, during their practical driving test. The DVSA examiner is present and observing. What is the most appropriate and ethically sound course of action for the approved driving instructor accompanying the learner? Option A. Continue the test as normal, assuming the learner will manage their distress independently. Option B. Advise the learner to try and push through the anxiety to complete the test, as this is a critical assessment. Option C. Immediately and safely stop the vehicle, offer reassurance to the learner, and then communicate the situation to the DVSA examiner. Option D. Terminate the test immediately and leave the learner at the test center without further explanation to the examiner. The correct answer is C. Immediately and safely stop the vehicle, offer reassurance to the learner, and then communicate the situation to the DVSA examiner. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Coventry, UK, due to the inherent risk of a learner driver experiencing a panic attack during a practical driving test. Instructor must balance the learner's well-being and the integrity of the DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, testing process. Careful judgment is required to determine the most appropriate and ethical course of action that adheres to DVSA guidelines and prioritizes safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the instructor immediately and calmly intervening to ensure the safety of the learner, the examiner, and other road users. This means stopping the vehicle in a safe location as soon as possible, offering reassurance to the learner, and then communicating the situation to the examiner. This approach is correct because it prioritizes immediate safety, a fundamental ethical and regulatory requirement for all driving instructors. The DVSA expects instructors to manage learner-driver behavior and to act responsibly in emergency or distressed situations. By stopping the vehicle safely, the instructor prevents potential harm and allows for a controlled assessment of the situation, aligning with the duty of care owed to all parties. Incorrect approach is analysis. Allowing the test to continue without intervention, despite recognizing the learner's distress, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the duty of care and could lead to a dangerous situation if the learner's ability to control the vehicle is compromised. It also undermines the purpose of the driving test, which is to assess safe driving ability. Suggesting the learner push through the panic attack to complete the test is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a disregard for the learner's mental and physical well-being and is ethically unsound. It places undue pressure on a distressed individual and could exacerbate their anxiety, potentially leading to further errors or unsafe driving. Immediately ending the test and leaving the learner at the test center without further support or communication with the examiner is also professionally unacceptable. While the test may need to be terminated, abandoning the learner without ensuring their safe departure or informing the examiner of the circumstances is unprofessional and neglects the instructor's responsibility to support their student. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, adheres to regulatory guidelines, and upholds ethical standards. In situations involving learner distress, the immediate priority is to ensure safety by stopping the vehicle in a secure manner. Following this, clear and calm communication with all relevant parties, including the examiner, is crucial. The instructor should then assess the learner's condition and determine the next steps in consultation with the examiner, considering the learner's welfare and the test's integrity. This systematic approach ensures that all aspects of the situation are addressed responsibly and ethically. Question 9. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a driving instructor in Coventry, UK, needs to adapt their teaching methods for the upcoming practical driving test changes. Which of the following represents the most effective and compliant approach to implementing these new DVSA assessment criteria? Option A. Continue with the current teaching methodology, assuming the new DVSA assessment criteria are unlikely to significantly alter the core skills required for passing the driving test. Option B. Rely on informal conversations with other driving instructors in Coventry to gauge the impact of the new syllabus and make minor adjustments to existing teaching materials. Option C. Attend official DVSA training sessions specifically designed for the new syllabus and thoroughly review all provided documentation to integrate the updated criteria into lesson plans and practice sessions. Option D. Focus on exposing learners to a wide variety of driving situations during lessons, believing this broad experience will inherently cover the new assessment points without needing to study the specific syllabus changes in detail. The correct answer is C. Attend official DVSA training sessions specifically designed for the new syllabus and thoroughly review all provided documentation to integrate the updated criteria into lesson plans and practice sessions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Coventry, UK, concerning the implementation of new assessment criteria for the practical driving test. The challenge lies in balancing the need to adhere to updated DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, guidelines with the practical realities of training diverse learners and ensuring fair, consistent assessment. The instructor must navigate potential conflicts between established teaching methods and the precise requirements of the new syllabus, while also managing learner expectations and anxieties. Careful judgment is required to interpret and apply the new rules effectively, without compromising the integrity of the test or the learner's opportunity to demonstrate their competence. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively engaging with the updated DVSA syllabus by attending official training sessions and thoroughly reviewing all provided documentation. This approach ensures the instructor gains a precise understanding of the new assessment criteria, including any nuances or specific performance indicators. By integrating this knowledge into their teaching and practice sessions, the instructor can effectively prepare learners for the revised test standards. This is correct because it directly aligns with the DVSA mandate to ensure all examiners and instructors are up to date with current testing procedures, promoting consistency and fairness across all practical driving tests conducted in Coventry. Adherence to DVSA guidelines is a fundamental regulatory requirement. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on informal discussions with other instructors or assuming that minor adjustments to existing teaching methods will suffice. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the official channels for understanding critical updates. It risks misinterpreting or overlooking key changes in the DVSA syllabus, leading to inadequate preparation for learners and potentially unfair assessments. This failure to seek official guidance constitutes a breach of professional responsibility to stay current with regulatory requirements. Another incorrect approach is to continue teaching using the old syllabus without making any significant changes, believing the new criteria are merely superficial. This is professionally unacceptable, as it demonstrates a disregard for the DVSA updated standards and the potential impact on learner success. It fails to acknowledge the regulatory imperative to adapt teaching practices to reflect current assessment requirements, thereby disadvantaging learners who will be assessed under the new framework. A further incorrect approach is to prioritize covering a broad range of driving scenarios over meticulously adhering to the specific performance standards outlined in the new DVSA syllabus. While comprehensive training is valuable, neglecting the precise details of the revised assessment criteria means learners may not be adequately prepared for the specific expectations of the examiners. This approach risks failing to meet the regulatory obligation to train candidates to the standard required by the DVSA, potentially leading to test failures due to a lack of focus on the updated assessment points. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a proactive and systematic approach to regulatory changes. This involves prioritizing official training and documentation, seeking clarification from regulatory bodies when necessary, and integrating new requirements into practice in a structured manner. A continuous professional development mindset, focused on understanding and implementing regulatory updates, is crucial for maintaining professional competence and ensuring the best outcomes for clients. Question 10. Strategic planning requires a driving instructor in Ontario to accurately assess a student's readiness for their G2 road test. If a student has successfully completed all the required maneuvers during practice sessions, including parallel parking and highway merging, and expresses strong confidence in their abilities, what is the most appropriate next step for the instructor to ensure compliance with Ontario's Ministry of Transportation, MTO, testing standards and ethical obligations? Option A. Conduct a final comprehensive mock test simulating the actual G2 road test conditions, evaluating the student's performance against the official MTO scoring rubric, and identifying any remaining areas for refinement before booking the official test. Option B. Book the G2 road test immediately, as the student has demonstrated proficiency in all required maneuvers and expressed confidence, assuming the MTO test will be a formality. Option C. Advise the student that their self-reported confidence and successful practice of individual maneuvers are sufficient and proceed to book the G2 road test without further formal assessment. Option D. Suggest the student take the G2 road test as soon as possible to gain experience, even if some minor errors were observed during practice, as the test itself will provide valuable feedback. The correct answer is A. Conduct a final comprehensive mock test simulating the actual G2 road test conditions, evaluating the student's performance against the official MTO scoring rubric, and identifying any remaining areas for refinement before booking the official test. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Ontario, Canada, who is responsible for preparing a student for the G2 road test. The challenge lies in balancing the student's perceived readiness with the objective requirements of the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO, testing standards, and the ethical obligation to ensure public safety. Misjudging a student's preparedness can lead to a failed test, wasted fees, and potentially unsafe driving on public roads. Conversely, delaying the test unnecessarily can frustrate the student and impact their confidence. Careful judgment, informed by objective assessment and regulatory understanding, is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic assessment of the student's performance against the official MTO driver's handbook and the specific criteria outlined for the G2 road test. This includes evaluating their ability to execute all required maneuvers safely and competently, such as lane changes, turns, parking, and observation skills, under varying traffic conditions. The instructor must also consider the student's understanding of road rules and their ability to make sound decisions. The Ontario Highway Traffic Act and associated MTO regulations mandate that drivers demonstrate a sufficient level of skill and knowledge to operate a vehicle safely. By adhering to these objective standards, the instructor fulfills their ethical duty to the student and the public, ensuring the student is truly ready for the test and not just for a single practice session. This approach prioritizes safety and compliance with provincial licensing requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on the student's self-assessment of their readiness. While student confidence is a factor, it is not a substitute for objective evaluation against established testing criteria. This approach fails to uphold the instructor's professional responsibility to assess competence and can lead to the student taking the test unprepared, potentially resulting in failure and a breach of the implicit duty of care owed to the student and other road users. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with booking the test based on a superficial understanding of the student's abilities, perhaps focusing only on a few successful maneuvers during a single lesson. This overlooks the comprehensive nature of the G2 test, which assesses a wide range of skills and decision-making under diverse conditions. This approach risks presenting a student who is not fully equipped to meet the MTO's safety standards, potentially leading to a failed test and a failure to adequately prepare the student for independent driving. A further incorrect approach is to book the test prematurely due to external pressure, such as the student's desire to complete the test quickly or the instructor's desire to fill their schedule. This prioritizes expediency over competence and safety, directly contravening the MTO's mandate to license safe drivers. It also undermines the professional integrity of the instructor and the licensing process. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant provincial regulations and testing standards, in this case, Ontario's MTO requirements. This is followed by a comprehensive, objective assessment of the student's skills against these standards, incorporating feedback from the student, but not being solely dictated by it. The instructor should then communicate their assessment clearly to the student, explaining the rationale based on the MTO criteria. If the student is not ready, the instructor should provide a clear plan for improvement, focusing on specific areas identified during the assessment. This process ensures that decisions are grounded in regulatory compliance, ethical responsibility, and the ultimate goal of producing safe, competent drivers. Question 11. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some driving instructors in Ontario, Canada, may be pressured to pass students who have completed their required training hours, but still exhibit significant weaknesses in critical driving skills. Considering the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's mandate for safe road operation, which of the following approaches best reflects professional and ethical conduct for a driving instructor? Option A. Advise the student to take the test immediately if they have completed their training hours, suggesting they can learn from any mistakes made during the actual road test. Option B. Focus on the student's ability to navigate basic traffic flow, overlooking minor errors in observation or hazard perception to ensure they meet the training hour requirement for testing. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive evaluation against the MTO's official testing standards, advising the student to postpone the test if significant deficiencies are identified, regardless of training hours completed. Option D. Pass the student if they have completed the minimum required training hours, assuming the hours equate to sufficient competency for the G2 road test. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive evaluation against the MTO's official testing standards, advising the student to postpone the test if significant deficiencies are identified, regardless of training hours completed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Ontario, Canada, due to the inherent subjectivity in assessing driving proficiency and the potential for differing interpretations of safe driving practices. The instructor must balance the need to adhere to the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's MTO testing standards with the responsibility of ensuring a candidate is genuinely safe to operate a vehicle independently. The pressure to pass a student, especially one who has invested time and money, can create an ethical dilemma. Careful judgment is required to avoid compromising safety for expediency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and objective evaluation of the candidate's performance against the official MTO driver's handbook and the specific criteria outlined for the G2 road test in Ontario. This means meticulously observing all aspects of the candidate's driving, including observation skills, lane changes, speed control, hazard perception, and adherence to traffic laws. If the candidate demonstrates consistent errors or a lack of understanding in critical areas, even if they have completed the required training hours, the instructor must ethically and professionally advise them that they are not yet ready for the test. This approach is correct because it prioritizes public safety, aligns with the MTO's mandate to license competent drivers, and upholds the instructor's professional integrity. It avoids the temptation to overlook deficiencies that could lead to accidents. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves passing a student who exhibits persistent difficulties with critical driving maneuvers, such as failing to check blind spots adequately during lane changes or demonstrating poor hazard perception at intersections. This is professionally unacceptable because it directly contravenes the MTO's objective of licensing safe drivers and puts other road users at risk. It also undermines the credibility of the driving school and the instructor. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the number of training hours completed, assuming that this guarantees readiness for the road test. While training hours are important, they are a measure of exposure and practice, not necessarily of skill mastery or safe decision-making. Relying on hours alone, without a rigorous assessment of actual driving competence, is a failure to meet professional obligations. A third incorrect approach is to downplay or ignore minor errors observed during practice sessions, believing they are insignificant. Even seemingly minor errors, when repeated or occurring in critical situations, can indicate underlying issues with judgment or skill that could lead to accidents. Professional instructor must identify and address all areas of concern, not just those that appear immediately dangerous. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and adherence to regulatory standards. This involves 1. Clearly understanding and applying the MTO's testing criteria. 2. Conducting objective and comprehensive assessments during all training sessions. 3. Maintaining open and honest communication with the student about their progress and areas needing improvement. 4. Making a professional judgment based on demonstrated competence, not on external pressures or assumptions. 5. Recognizing that the ultimate responsibility is to ensure the student is a safe and responsible driver, not just to help them pass a test. Question 12. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a learner driver in Coventry, UK, has shown significant improvement and expresses strong confidence in their ability to pass the practical driving test next week. However, during their last few practice sessions, they have occasionally hesitated when reacting to unexpected hazards and have demonstrated a tendency to rely heavily on the instructor's prompts for certain complex maneuvers. Considering the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency (DVSA) guidelines for test readiness, which approach best reflects professional responsibility. Option A. Agree to book the test as requested, given the learner's confidence and recent progress, assuming they will perform adequately on the day. Option B. focus the remaining practice sessions solely on perfecting the specific maneuvers and routes the learner has struggled with to ensure they can execute these flawlessly on the test. Option C. Conduct a final, comprehensive mock test simulating actual DVSA conditions, focusing on hazard perception and decision-making under pressure, and only recommend the test if the learner consistently demonstrates safe and independent driving throughout. Option D. Advise the learner that the decision is ultimately theirs and allow them to book the test if they feel sufficiently prepared, regardless of the instructor's reservations. The correct answer is C. Conduct a final, comprehensive mock test simulating actual DVSA conditions, focusing on hazard perception and decision-making under pressure, and only recommend the test if the learner consistently demonstrates safe and independent driving throughout. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Coventry, UK, concerning the assessment of a learner-driver's readiness for the practical driving test. The challenge lies in balancing the learner's eagerness and perceived progress with the instructor's professional responsibility to ensure public safety and adherence to the standards set by the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, DVSA. A misjudgment could lead to an unsafe driver on the road or unnecessary stress and financial burden for the learner. Careful judgment is required to objectively evaluate the learner's skills against the DVSA stringent requirements. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the learner's performance against the DVSA official test criteria, specifically focusing on the areas of risk and hazard perception. This includes evaluating their ability to identify potential dangers, make appropriate decisions, and execute maneuvers safely and competently, even under pressure. The instructor must consider the learner's consistency in demonstrating safe driving habits, their ability to adapt to changing road conditions, and their overall control of the vehicle. This approach aligns directly with the DVSA mandate to ensure that only drivers who meet the required standard of competence and safety are licensed, thereby protecting other road users and upholding the integrity of the driving test. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves agreeing to put the learner forward for the test based solely on their expressed confidence and a few recent successful practice sessions. This fails to account for the possibility of performance anxiety on the actual test day or a lack of consistent application of safe driving principles. It prioritizes the learner's immediate desire over the paramount importance of public safety and the DVSA standards, potentially leading to a failed test and a driver who is not yet truly ready. Another incorrect approach is to defer the decision entirely to the learner, suggesting they decide if they are ready. This abdicates the instructor's professional responsibility and expertise. The instructor is trained to identify subtle issues and assess risks that a learner may not recognize. This approach bypasses the critical role of professional judgment in determining test readiness and could result in a learner taking the test prematurely, facing disappointment, and potentially developing unsafe driving habits due to a lack of objective guidance. A further incorrect approach is to focus primarily on the learner's ability to pass specific test routes or maneuvers they have practiced extensively, without a broader assessment of their hazard perception and decision-making in varied, unpredictable situations. While familiarity with test routes is helpful, true readiness involves adaptability and the ability to drive safely in any environment. This narrow focus neglects the DVSA emphasis on developing a competent and safe driver, not just someone who can navigate a predetermined course. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding and consistently applying the DVSA assessment criteria. 2. Conducting objective, ongoing evaluations of the learner's performance, looking for consistency and mastery across all required competencies, not just isolated successes. 3. Considering the learner's emotional state and ability to perform under test conditions. 4. Maintaining professional integrity by making decisions based on competence and safety, even if it means delaying a test. 5. Communicating clearly and constructively with the learner about their progress and the rationale behind any decision regarding test readiness. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that a driving instructor in Ontario, Canada, is preparing a student for their G2 road test. The student is experiencing significant anxiety and expresses a strong desire to just pass, even if they feel they haven't fully mastered certain maneuvers. The instructor has observed that while the student can navigate the typical test route adequately, their hazard perception and ability to react to unexpected situations are still developing. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the instructor? Option A. Reassure the student that their anxiety is normal and focus exclusively on practicing the specific test route and maneuvers they are most comfortable with, aiming to build their confidence for the test day. Option B. Conduct a detailed assessment of the student's driving skills against the MTO's G2 testing criteria, identify specific areas of weakness, and provide targeted instruction and honest feedback to the student about their readiness for the test, emphasizing that passing requires demonstrated proficiency and safety. Option C. Suggest to the student that the instructor can subtly signal them during the test if they encounter a difficult situation, thereby increasing their chances of passing. Option D. Advise the student that the best strategy is to wing it and hope for the best, as the examiner is looking for basic competence and the student's familiarity with the route will likely be sufficient. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed assessment of the student's driving skills against the MTO's G2 testing criteria, identify specific areas of weakness, and provide targeted instruction and honest feedback to the student about their readiness for the test, emphasizing that passing requires demonstrated proficiency and safety. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Ontario, Canada, due to the strict regulatory framework governing driver training and testing. The challenge lies in balancing the need to prepare a student for the practical driving test with the ethical obligation to ensure the student is genuinely safe and competent, not just capable of passing a specific test. Misinterpreting or circumventing the requirements of the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO, can lead to serious consequences, including license suspension for the instructor and potential safety risks on public roads. Careful judgment is required to navigate the student's anxiety and the instructor's professional responsibilities. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the student's actual driving skills against the MTO's established criteria for the G2 road test. This approach prioritizes safety and adherence to regulations. It requires the instructor to identify specific areas where the student demonstrates weakness, such as lane changes, intersection management, or hazard perception, and to provide targeted instruction and practice. The instructor must then communicate these areas of concern to the student, explaining that passing the test is contingent on demonstrating proficiency in these skills, not just on completing the test route. This aligns with the MTO's mandate to ensure all licensed drivers possess the necessary skills to operate a vehicle safely on Ontario roads. Ethical practice dictates that an instructor should not present a student for a test if they have reasonable grounds to believe the student is not yet safe to drive independently. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves focusing solely on memorizing the test route and practicing maneuvers in a way that is designed to impress the examiner, rather than on developing genuine defensive driving skills. This fails to meet the MTO's objective of producing safe drivers and could lead to the student being unprepared for unexpected situations not covered by the test route. Another incorrect approach is to downplay the student's anxiety and assure them they will pass without a realistic assessment of their current abilities. This is ethically questionable as it sets unrealistic expectations and potentially puts the student and others at risk. Finally, an approach that suggests the instructor can coach the examiner or provide subtle cues during the test is a direct violation of MTO testing protocols and constitutes professional misconduct, undermining the integrity of the licensing process. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific requirements and objectives of the governing body, MTO in this case. 2. Conducting objective and thorough assessments of student competency against these standards. 3. Communicating honestly and constructively with the student about their progress and areas for improvement. 4. Maintaining professional boundaries and avoiding any actions that could compromise the integrity of the testing process. 5. Recognizing that the ultimate goal is to produce safe, responsible drivers, not just individuals who can pass a test. Question 14. Risk assessment procedures indicate that the DVSA has introduced updated practical driving test assessment criteria in Coventry. As a driving instructor, What is the most appropriate initial response to ensure compliance and effective learner preparation? Option A. Review the updated DVSA guidance thoroughly, understand the rationale behind the changes, and adapt training methodologies to incorporate these new criteria with clear communication to learners. Option B. Express concerns about the practicality of the new criteria to colleagues and delay implementing them until further clarification or adjustments are made by the DVSA. Option C. Continue training based on the previous assessment criteria, assuming the new guidelines are minor adjustments that will not significantly impact test outcomes. Option D. Inform learners about the new criteria, but leave them to research and understand the specific changes and their implications for the test. The correct answer is A. Review the updated DVSA guidance thoroughly, understand the rationale behind the changes, and adapt training methodologies to incorporate these new criteria with clear communication to learners. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Coventry, UK, concerning the implementation of new assessment criteria for the practical driving test. The challenge lies in balancing the need to adhere to updated DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, guidelines with the practical realities of training diverse learners, some of whom may have specific learning needs or have been trained under previous standards. Ensuring consistency, fairness, and compliance while maintaining a supportive learning environment requires careful judgment and a thorough understanding of the regulatory framework. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively engaging with the updated DVSA guidance, understanding the rationale behind the changes, and integrating them into training methodologies through targeted practice and clear communication with learners. This approach ensures that instructors are fully compliant with current standards, can effectively prepare candidates for the test, and can explain the new requirements to them in a way that minimizes anxiety and confusion. The DVSA emphasis on developing safe, independent drivers means that training must align with their assessment objectives. This proactive and communicative strategy directly supports the DVSA goal of improving road safety by ensuring all candidates are assessed against the most current and relevant standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves continuing to train solely based on the previous assessment criteria, assuming the new guidelines are minor variations. This is a regulatory failure, as it directly contravenes DVSA directives, potentially leading to candidates being inadequately prepared for the current test and failing unfairly. It also demonstrates a lack of professional development and commitment to upholding current road safety standards. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the new criteria as overly burdensome or impractical without seeking clarification or exploring alternative training methods. This is an ethical failure, as it prioritizes the instructor's convenience over the learner's right to receive training that aligns with official assessment standards. It also undermines the DVSA efforts to enhance driving standards and road safety. A further incorrect approach is to inform learners about the new criteria, but without providing specific, tailored practice or explanation, leaving them to interpret the changes themselves. This is a failure in professional duty of care. While acknowledging the changes, it neglects the instructor's responsibility to guide and support learners through the updated assessment process, potentially causing undue stress and hindering their performance. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a continuous professional development mindset. When regulatory updates occur, the decision-making process should involve 1. Thoroughly reviewing the new guidance from the official regulatory body, DVSA in this case. 2. Assessing the impact of these changes on existing training programs and learner needs. 3. Developing and implementing revised training strategies that are compliant and effective. 4. Communicating clearly and proactively with learners about any changes that affect their training and assessment. 5. Seeking clarification from the regulatory body if any aspects of the new guidance are unclear. This structured approach ensures both regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility towards learners. Question 15. The evaluation methodology shows that the Coventry Driver Testing Center is experiencing difficulties in maintaining consistent assessment standards for practical driving tests due to unpredictable weather patterns. Considering the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, DVSA, guidelines for the UK, which of the following represents the most appropriate implementation strategy to address this challenge? Option A. Develop and implement a standardized protocol for adapting test routes and assessment criteria during specific adverse weather conditions, ensuring core driving competencies remain rigorously evaluated. Option B. Cancel all practical driving tests whenever any form of inclement weather is forecast, regardless of its severity. Option C. Proceed with all standard test routes and assessment criteria irrespective of prevailing weather conditions, assuming candidates can manage any environmental challenges. Option D. Grant individual examiners complete autonomy to modify test routes and assessment criteria based on their personal judgment during any weather event. The correct answer is A. Develop and implement a standardized protocol for adapting test routes and assessment criteria during specific adverse weather conditions, ensuring core driving competencies remain rigorously evaluated. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows that the Coventry Driver Testing Center is facing an implementation challenge related to ensuring consistent and fair assessment of candidates under varying weather conditions. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for standardized testing with the practical realities of the environment, directly impacting the integrity and fairness of the driver licensing process. A failure to manage this effectively could lead to accusations of bias, inconsistent standards, and ultimately, compromised road safety. The best approach involves proactively establishing clear, documented procedures for adapting test routes and assessment criteria during adverse weather, while ensuring these adaptations do not compromise the core competencies being evaluated. This means having predefined alternative routes that still assess essential skills like hazard perception, vehicle control, and adherence to road signs, and providing clear guidance to examiners on how to adjust their observations without lowering the overall standard. This is correct because it aligns with the principles of fairness and consistency mandated by the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency (DVSA) guidelines, which emphasize objective assessment and the need for candidates to demonstrate competence in a range of conditions. It also upholds the ethical responsibility to ensure all drivers are adequately prepared for real-world driving. An incorrect approach would be to simply cancel tests during any inclement weather, as this creates significant delays and inconveniences for candidates and examiners, and fails to assess a candidate's ability to drive safely in less than ideal conditions. This is ethically problematic as it doesn't fully prepare drivers for all eventualities on the road. Another incorrect approach would be to allow examiners complete discretion to alter test routes and criteria without any standardized guidelines. This introduces a high risk of subjective bias and inconsistency, violating the DVSA requirement for standardized and objective testing. Finally, continuing with standard routes and criteria regardless of weather severity, potentially forcing candidates to perform maneuvers in unsafe conditions, is also incorrect. This poses a direct safety risk to the candidate, examiner, and other road users, and fails to assess the candidate's ability to adapt to real-world driving challenges. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, fairness, and adherence to regulatory guidelines. This involves anticipating potential challenges, developing robust contingency plans, ensuring clear communication and training for all staff, and regularly reviewing and updating procedures based on feedback and operational experience. Question 16. Process analysis reveals that a driving instructor in Coventry, UK, is assessing a learner who is eager to book their practical driving test. The learner believes they are ready, having mastered all the required maneuvers and driven for a significant number of hours. However, the instructor has observed occasional lapses in hazard perception during busy traffic and inconsistent independent driving in unfamiliar areas. Considering the DVSA guidelines for learning to drive on a public road, which approach best reflects professional and regulatory compliance? Option A. Book the practical test for the learner immediately, as their desire to take the test and mastery of maneuvers indicate they are sufficiently prepared according to general learning progression. Option B. Recommend the learner book the test themselves and proceed with their own judgment of readiness, as the instructor's role is primarily to teach, not to dictate when a test should be taken. Option C. Advise the learner that they are not yet ready for the practical test and continue to focus on developing their hazard perception and independent driving skills in a wider range of conditions until consistent competence is demonstrated, as per DVSA requirements for safe independent driving. Option D. Suggest the learner take the test, but focus their remaining lessons on practicing only the maneuvers, assuming the examiner will overlook minor issues in hazard perception if the maneuvers are perfect. The correct answer is C. Advise the learner that they are not yet ready for the practical test and continue to focus on developing their hazard perception and independent driving skills in a wider range of conditions until consistent competence is demonstrated, as per DVSA requirements for safe independent driving. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Coventry, UK, concerning the application of the DVSA, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, learning to drive on a public road regulations. The challenge lies in balancing the learner's eagerness to progress with the paramount importance of ensuring they meet the required safety standards before attempting the practical test. Misjudging a learner's readiness can lead to a failed test, potential safety risks on the road, and damage to the instructor's professional reputation and the learner's confidence. Careful judgment is required to assess not just technical skill, but also hazard perception, decision-making, and overall road awareness in varied conditions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, ongoing assessment of the learner's ability to drive safely and independently, adhering to the DVSA learning to drive on a public road guidelines. This includes consistently demonstrating competence in all aspects of the highway code and safe driving techniques, including hazard identification and response, in a variety of traffic and weather conditions. The instructor must be confident that the learner can drive without supervision and is ready to pass the practical test, which is the core requirement for a learner to be eligible. This approach prioritizes public safety and upholds the integrity of the driving test process as mandated by the DVSA. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves allowing the learner to book their practical test solely based on their expressed desire and the instructor's belief that they are almost there, without a definitive assessment of their independent driving capabilities and consistent adherence to all DVSA standards. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement of ensuring the learner can drive safely and competently without supervision, potentially leading to a test failure and compromising road safety. Another incorrect approach is to focus primarily on the learner's ability to perform specific test maneuvers perfectly, while overlooking their overall hazard perception and decision-making skills in real-world driving situations. The DVSA test assesses a broader range of competencies, and neglecting these crucial elements means the learner is not truly ready for independent driving, even if they excel at specific tasks. A further incorrect approach is to book the test prematurely because the instructor feels pressure from the learner or wants to secure a test slot before potential price increases. This prioritizes convenience or financial considerations over the learner's actual readiness and the DVSA safety standards, which is an ethical and professional failing. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and objective assessment framework. This involves regularly evaluating the learner against the DVSA syllabus and practical test criteria, focusing on consistent performance, independent decision-making, and hazard management. If a learner expresses readiness, the instructor should conduct a mock test under realistic conditions, simulating the independent driving section and varied traffic scenarios. The decision to book the test should be based on the learner's demonstrated ability to meet all required standards consistently, not on subjective feelings, external pressures, or incomplete assessments. Question 17. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a client in Ontario has expressed a strong preference for a high-risk, speculative investment strategy that appears to contradict their stated long-term financial goals and moderate risk tolerance. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Immediately implement the client's preferred high-risk investment strategy as requested, making a brief note of the client's insistence. Option B. Proceed with the client's preferred strategy, but only after obtaining a signed waiver from the client acknowledging the risks, without further detailed explanation or discussion of alternatives. Option C. Politely decline to implement the client's preferred strategy and unilaterally select a different, more conservative investment approach that the advisor deems more appropriate. Option D. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client, clearly outlining the risks and potential downsides of their preferred strategy, explaining why it may not align with their stated goals, and presenting alternative, more suitable investment options that meet regulatory requirements. The correct answer is D. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client, clearly outlining the risks and potential downsides of their preferred strategy, explaining why it may not align with their stated goals, and presenting alternative, more suitable investment options that meet regulatory requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when the client's preference may lead to suboptimal outcomes or increased risk. The advisor must navigate this delicate balance while adhering to the regulatory framework governing financial advice in Ontario. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance, maintain client trust, and uphold professional standards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, documented discussion with the client about the implications of their preferred investment strategy. This approach prioritizes client education and informed consent. The advisor must clearly articulate the risks and potential downsides of the client's chosen approach, explain why it may not align with their stated financial goals or risk tolerance, and present alternative, more suitable strategies that meet regulatory requirements and fiduciary obligations. This aligns with the Ontario Securities Commission, OSC, Rule 31-505 regarding suitability and the general principles of client-centric advice, emphasizing the advisor's responsibility to ensure investments are appropriate for the client's circumstances. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately implementing the client's preferred strategy without further discussion or analysis. This fails to meet the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest and violates the suitability requirements under OSC Rule 31-505. It prioritizes client demand over professional judgment and regulatory compliance, potentially exposing the client to undue risk. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's preference outright and unilaterally impose a different strategy. The advisor may believe their alternative is superior. This approach disregards the client's autonomy and can damage the client-advisor relationship. It also fails to adequately engage the client in the decision-making process, which is crucial for fostering understanding and long-term adherence to a financial plan. A further incorrect approach is to proceed with the client's preferred strategy while making only a cursory note of the client's insistence, without a detailed explanation of the risks. This constitutes a failure to adequately document the suitability assessment and the client's understanding of the associated risks. It leaves the advisor vulnerable to regulatory scrutiny and potential complaints if the investment performs poorly, as it suggests a lack of due diligence in ensuring the client was fully informed. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the client's stated goals and risk tolerance. This is followed by an objective assessment of investment options against these parameters, considering regulatory requirements like suitability. When a client's preference deviates from this assessment, the professional's duty is to engage in a transparent and educational dialogue, clearly outlining the rationale behind their recommendations and the implications of the client's preferred course of action. Documentation of this process is paramount to demonstrate compliance and protect both the client and the advisor. Question 18. The monitoring system for the Coventry driver's test flags a candidate for a momentary hesitation at a junction where visibility was clear and no other road users were present, followed by a smooth and safe entry. The examiner must decide how to record this event. Option A. Dismiss the hesitation entirely as a system anomaly without further consideration, assuming the system is overly sensitive. Option B. Record the hesitation as a minor, inconsequential observation that did not constitute a driving fault, given the clear visibility, lack of hazard, and subsequent safe execution. Option C. Immediately record the hesitation as a driving fault, irrespective of the circumstances or the candidate's subsequent safe driving. Option D. Record the hesitation as a serious fault due to the potential for future risk, even though no immediate danger was present. The correct answer is B. Record the hesitation as a minor, inconsequential observation that did not constitute a driving fault, given the clear visibility, lack of hazard, and subsequent safe execution. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a commitment to upholding the standards of the Coventry driver's test by actively identifying potential breaches of the highway code and safe driving practices. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the examiner to balance the need for rigorous assessment with the practical realities of real-world driving, where minor, non-hazardous deviations can occur. The examiner must exercise sound judgment to distinguish between minor errors that do not compromise safety or adherence to the code, and significant faults that warrant a fail. The best approach involves a nuanced assessment that prioritizes safety and adherence to the highway code. This means recognizing that minor, inconsequential hesitations or slight deviations from the ideal line that do not endanger the driver, other road users, or pedestrians, and are corrected immediately without further consequence, may not constitute a driving fault. This aligns with the spirit of the Coventry driver's test, which aims to ensure drivers are safe and competent, not necessarily perfect. The examiner's role is to assess the candidate's ability to drive safely and legally, and this approach allows for that by focusing on the impact of any observed behavior on overall safety and compliance. An approach that immediately flags any deviation from the perfect execution of a maneuver, regardless of its impact on safety or the highway code, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge the practicalities of driving and the assessment criteria, which are focused on safety and competence. Similarly, an approach that dismisses any observed behavior as insignificant without considering its potential to escalate or its relation to specific highway code rules is also flawed. This overlooks the cumulative effect of minor errors and the importance of demonstrating consistent adherence to regulations. Finally, an approach that relies solely on the monitoring systems, alerts without applying professional judgment and contextual understanding of the driving environment, and the candidate's overall performance is inadequate. The system is a tool, not a replacement for the examiner's expertise. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that involves 1. Observing the candidate's driving behavior. 2. Cross-referencing observed behavior with the specific requirements of the highway code and the Coventry driver's test assessment criteria. 3. Evaluating the immediate and potential impact of any deviation on safety and compliance. And 4. Exercising professional judgment to determine if the behavior constitutes a driving fault, a serious fault, or is within acceptable parameters for a learner driver. Question 19. During the evaluation of a candidate's driving ability for a Coventry driver's test, an examiner observes a consistent pattern of the candidate exceeding the posted speed limit by approximately 3-5 mph on residential roads, despite demonstrating competence in other areas of the test. Which of the following actions best reflects the professional and regulatory requirements for assessing this candidate? Option A. Immediately fail the candidate upon the first observed instance of exceeding the speed limit, without further observation of the pattern. Option B. Verbally warn the candidate about the speeding during the test and pass them if they immediately correct the behavior. Option C. Document the instances of speeding, noting the specific locations and recorded speeds relative to the posted limit, and assess the candidate's overall performance based on this evidence. Option D. Overlook the minor speeding infractions due to the candidate's otherwise strong performance, focusing on other aspects of the test. The correct answer is C. Document the instances of speeding, noting the specific locations and recorded speeds relative to the posted limit, and assess the candidate's overall performance based on this evidence. Explanation. During the evaluation of a candidate's driving ability for a Coventry driver's test, an examiner encounters a situation where the candidate, despite demonstrating proficiency in most aspects of the test, exhibits a persistent and concerning habit of exceeding the speed limit by a small margin, approximately 3-5 mph, on residential streets. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the examiner must balance the candidate's overall competence with adherence to strict road safety regulations and the specific requirements of the Coventry driver's test syllabus. The examiner's judgment is critical in determining whether this minor, yet consistent, infraction constitutes a failure to meet the required standard of safe driving. The best approach involves the examiner meticulously documenting the instances of speeding, noting the specific locations and the speed recorded relative to the posted limit. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the candidate's failure to adhere to the fundamental requirement of observing speed limits, a critical component of safe driving, and a direct contravention of the highway code, which is implicitly part of the driving test standards in Coventry. The Coventry driver's test syllabus, like all DVSA-administered tests, mandates that candidates demonstrate the ability to drive at appropriate speeds, which includes respecting posted limits. Failing to do so, even by a small margin, indicates a lack of control and awareness that could compromise safety. This documentation also provides a clear, objective basis for the assessment outcome. An incorrect approach would be to overlook the speeding due to the candidate's otherwise good performance. This is professionally unacceptable because it compromises the integrity of the test and the safety standards it aims to uphold. The Highway Code explicitly states the importance of adhering to speed limits, and a driving test is designed to assess a candidate's ability to comply with these rules. Ignoring this infraction, regardless of other strengths, suggests a failure to apply the assessment criteria consistently and rigorously, potentially leading to the licensing of an unsafe driver. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately fail the candidate without further observation or consideration of the context. While speeding is a failure, the examiner should ensure the infraction is clearly and consistently demonstrated. A single, isolated instance might be handled differently than a persistent pattern. However, in this scenario, the question specifies a persistent and concerning habit, which elevates the seriousness of the infraction beyond a minor oversight. A third incorrect approach would be to verbally warn the candidate about the speeding during the test, and then pass them if they correct it immediately. This is problematic because the driving test is an assessment of performance throughout the entire duration. While feedback is important, the test is not a training session. Allowing a candidate to correct a significant, persistent fault mid-test undermines the purpose of the assessment and could be seen as lenient to the point of compromising safety standards. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and adherence to regulatory standards. This involves 1. Clearly understanding the assessment criteria and the relevant legal framework, e.g., Highway Code. 2. Objectively observing and documenting candidate performance, noting both strengths and weaknesses. 3. Applying the assessment criteria consistently and fairly to all candidates. 4. Making a judgment based on the evidence gathered, with a clear rationale that aligns with regulatory requirements and professional ethics. In situations involving potential safety compromises, a conservative approach that errs on the side of caution is generally preferred. Question 20. In Ontario, Canada, a driving instructor is assessing a student's readiness for their G2 road test. The student has paid for several lessons and expresses strong confidence in their abilities, having successfully completed most practice maneuvers. However, the instructor has observed consistent minor errors in the student's observation at intersections and their speed control on residential streets during the last 3 lessons. The student is eager to book their test next week to avoid a price increase on the test fee. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the instructor to recommend regarding the road test booking? Option A. Advise the student to postpone booking the road test until the observed errors in intersection observation and speed control are consistently corrected to meet Ministry of Transportation (MTO) standards. Option B. Recommend the student book the road test immediately, assuming the examiner will provide feedback on these minor issues during the test. Option C. Suggest the student book the road test and focus solely on practicing the maneuvers they feel most confident with, as the examiner will likely overlook minor inconsistencies. Option D. Encourage the student to book the road test based on their expressed confidence, as the financial incentive of avoiding a price increase is a significant factor for the student. The correct answer is A. Advise the student to postpone booking the road test until the observed errors in intersection observation and speed control are consistently corrected to meet Ministry of Transportation (MTO) standards. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Ontario, Canada, as it requires them to balance the immediate financial needs of their business with the paramount ethical and legal obligation to ensure a candidate is genuinely ready for their road test. The pressure to secure bookings and generate income can create a temptation to overlook potential readiness issues, but the instructor's duty of care and adherence to the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's (MTO) guidelines are non-negotiable. The best professional approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the candidate's driving skills against the MTO's established criteria for the specific road test level. This includes evaluating their ability to safely and competently execute all required maneuvers, demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of traffic laws, and exhibit defensive driving techniques. The instructor must consider the candidate's performance over a sufficient period, not just a single session, and be prepared to advise against booking the test if any significant deficiencies remain. This aligns with the MTO's mandate to ensure public safety on Ontario's roads and upholds the ethical responsibility of an instructor to act in the best interest of both the student and the wider community. The instructor's professional judgment, informed by MTO standards, is the primary determinant. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize the booking fee over the candidate's readiness. This could manifest as advising a candidate to book the test, even when the instructor has identified significant recurring errors in critical areas such as speed management, lane changes, or intersection procedures. This failure to adhere to MTO standards for safe driving directly contravenes the instructor's ethical duty and could lead to the candidate failing the test, potentially causing them financial loss and emotional distress, and more importantly, putting other road users at risk. Another incorrect approach is to solely rely on the candidate's self-assessment of their readiness. While a student's confidence is a factor, it cannot override the instructor's professional evaluation based on objective performance metrics. An instructor's role is to provide expert guidance and identify areas for improvement that the student may not recognize themselves. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to book the test based on the assumption that the examiner will pass them anyway, or that the test itself will serve as a final learning opportunity. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the road test's purpose, which is to assess existing competence, not to provide on-the-spot training. It also disregards the potential consequences of an unqualified driver being granted a license. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding and consistently applying the relevant regulatory standards, MTO road test criteria. 2. Conducting objective and thorough assessments of the candidate's performance. 3. Communicating honestly and constructively with the candidate about their strengths and weaknesses. 4. Making recommendations based on professional judgment and the candidate's demonstrated ability to meet safety standards, rather than on financial incentives or external pressures.